Thank you. Next, we have Claudia Preparata. Is that correct? Research Director from the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 3299.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Preparata, and I'm the Research Director at ASM 3299. We're the University of California's largest employee union, representing 22,000 workers at UC campuses and medical centers. I thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. Like the governor, legislature, UC students, and other stakeholders, ASME 3299 strongly opposes UC's proposed tuition hikes. While we support more state investment in higher education beyond the governor's budget blueprint, we believe that this reinvestment needs to be tied to improved transparency and accountability for how UC spends its money. This is particularly true for UC executive compensation and growth in middle management, both of which have come at a real cost not only to our members, but to UC students, faculty, and California taxpayers. The lack of transparency obscures a redirection of money that used to fund instruction and other student services to increasingly funding 6 to 7-figure salaries in a growing army of middle managers. And while not a recent phenomenon, it is one that accelerated after 2009. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2008, just 293 UC employees received gross pay in excess of $400,000 at a total cost of just $160 million. By 2013, after years of budget cuts and tuition hikes, 793 employees received these paychecks at a total cost of $452 million. During the same time period, the cost of extra perks that 250 of UC's highest paid employees receive, including housing, car allowances, moving costs, and cash bonuses, swelled from 17 to 24 million per year. This phenomenon is best understood in the context of UC's adoption of the Funding Streams Initiative in the face of state budget cuts. This policy, in 2011, decentralized decision-making operations and allowed campuses to retain revenues they generated, incentivizing local administrators to find efficiencies and reduce cost. Arguably, the merits look good on paper, but the reality is that it effectively transformed UC campuses into independent profit centers with unintended consequences that have allowed for such executive access to flourish. This puts better into focus why campuses with a stronger brand have an incentive and ability to increase enrollment of out-of-state students. That is to help fund exorbitant executive salaries in the rising ranks of UC middle managers. At the same time, the staff that actually provides student instruction and other support services, such as administrative, custodial, or food service, has been cut the most. We see this whether it's academic administrators growing at a rate of 21% since 2009 versus a 5% growth of all other academic staff, or for our members, the replacement of career jobs with low-wage contractors under the guise of cost-cutting. The reality is, though, that privatization is not a panacea and has actually cost UC millions of dollars more than if the work was done in-house. Our research has proven that. This decentralized decision-making is also all but eliminating transparency and public reporting around executive compensation for UC's top brass. The 170-plus executives who make up UC's Senior Management Personnel Group, SMG. And while criticism of UC's executive compensation is not new, a newly revamped system in 2012 makes it even more alarming. Today, only compensation of UC's top 15 SMG titles, or approximately 27 individuals, automatically require regental approval, replacing a system where compensation for all UC executives were brought to their regions for public review. This means that the salaries for the remaining 140-plus executives are approved at the campus level away from the public eye. If it is within a certain market zone as deemed by UC. So not surprisingly, since the system was implemented 2 years ago, 43% of these executives received salary adjustments on top of across-the-board increases 2 years in a row. So this begs the question, how does UC determine what is a competitive salary for its SMG executives? Specifically, who does UC compare itself to, and what does it compare? In the past, we know that UC looked to the private sector companies to make the case that its executives were paid below market, including Boeing, Chevron, HP, Wells Fargo, among others. Today, the university pulls from 60 market surveys considered proprietary and confidential. Given UC's history and the explosion of salaries more fit for a Fortune 500 company, the lack of transparency is particularly problematic. And the what that is being compared is just as important. My testimony includes a chart that UC distributed at the September 2014 Regents meeting to argue for a 20% increase in base salary for its chancellors. It asks fact or myth. UC claims fact. Most UC chancellors rank near the bottom of academic university leaders in base pay. Myth, UC chancellors are underpaid. Question mark. The chart, which hopefully you have before you, it only shows one side of the coin. By looking at base salaries, admitted here is the $1 million in other cash compensation, benefits, and pensions UC paid on behalf of its chancellors in 2013. This fact is especially noteworthy since, according to the Administrators in Higher Education survey, which lists UC as a participant, 66% of comparable institutions do not provide any deferred compensation for its chancellors. And yet at UC, not only do chancellors receive a pension benefit, but a handful of them also receive a supplemental pension equal to 3 or 5% of their base salary. These omissions, matched with raw numbers, policy directives, and a corresponding decline in transparency, raise the issue of accountability and the need for more legislative oversight of executive pay. An equally disturbing diversion of resources away from UC's core mission has to do with management bloat, specifically growth of middle managers, or UC's middle management and senior professional personnel group, MSP, comprised of about 10,000 individuals. The data shows that the MSP group has grown by 24%, or by more than 2,000 employees between 2009 and 2014. UC refutes these numbers because it asserts that there are many professional titles also embedded in this group. Yet, why is it so difficult for the public to tease out the number of managers? It is intentional. In fact, personnel data on UC's website allows the public to observe trends for faculty, lecturers, or other occupational groups, and yet UC executives are lumped together with this obscure but rapidly growing MSP group. This obscurity prompted us, ASME, to dig deeper, scouring 4 different sets of data sources, one which is only available through a Public Records Act request. In the course of this incredibly time-consuming exercise, we isolated a subgroup in UC's personnel reporting system called managers, comprising about 5,300 MSP titles, primarily engineer, director, manager titles. And we did not land too far from where we started. We found that as UC staff has grown by approximately 8% since 2009, this layer of middle management has increased by 14%, or about 700 individuals. And based on preliminary 2014 payroll data, the associated payroll costs and gross pay alone are approximately $765 million, almost a 30% increase since 2009. And these numbers actually underestimate the growth in and cost of this middle management layer, as we identified at least another 500 director, manager, and supervisory titles dispersed in other occupational categories within this MSP group. We also see similar trends amongst the university's academic staff. While staff grew by 5%, the number of academic administrators increased by 21%, more than 4 times as much. At the same time, the number of ladder-ranked faculty only increased by 2.1%. Ultimately, these figures tell us that UC is not only becoming less transparent, but also less accountable as it diverts more and more scarce resources away from its mission. This is not only unsustainable, but also shortchanges the needs of students, patients, and the tax-paying public. In conclusion, we welcome the legislature's increased scrutiny of UC spending, alongside a reinvestment in higher education. ASME stands ready to support legislation that can arrest this growing diversion of funds. We believe the scrutiny should not be limited to the explosion of executive compensation middle management, but also extend to policy directives that have paved the way for decentralizing financial decision-making, eliminated transparency, and enabling campuses campus administrator to squander scarce resources, including the outsourcing of UC career jobs to the lowest bidder with no public accountability. Before us is the opportunity to make real and lasting structural change at the University of California. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Claudia. Question of any of the panelists? Someone member?
It's not just a question. I don't have anything for you, but I wanted to thank you, the panel, for giving us the picture of where the UC is spending its money, and we have a better understanding from your perspective. And it is our plan to have a more dedicated hearings to do just that. In answer to Jefferson and Ms. Claudia, I think one of the things that we would like to do is probably revisit the presentation made by Mr. Brostrom. I would like to ask if you would provide us in your follow-up reports to the committee, if you could break out the senior management categories more clearly so the public can better understand its administrative positions, especially with respect to the number of executives that are getting paid at $200,000 or more. I think it will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And just while you're on that, that's one of the follow-up items I was going to bring up later, but I'll do so now. For the Vice Chancellor, make sure we recognize that not only core funds versus not, but which divisions they're in. Sometimes we say, oh, they're the UCLA football coach, or in the teaching hospitals versus faculty administration. So if you can do it in those silos, in addition to the fund.
Yeah, we can break all of that.
Okay. And I wanted to ask Jefferson, you're a student at what campus?
UC Merced.
UC Merced. Well, thank you for being a pioneer down there in the Central Valley. I know Assemblymember Gray would be really excited to know that you're there and enjoying your educational experience. I wanted to ask you, we heard earlier from some of our Assembly members talking about how full-time tenure-track faculty versus lecturers. How often do you get to see your tenure-track faculty members there?
I think Nathan highlighted this a little bit earlier, in that UC Merced's a lot different from the UC campuses. A lot of our faculty members are actually not tenured. My professors that I have had in the past, and even now, some of them commute from as far as Emeryville and Sacramento for about 2 days of the week to come teach as lecturers. And as for faculty tenured professors, I have a few of those as well. Merced has a really great mix of the kind of professors that we have. A lot of them very dedicated enough to drive about 3 hours to our campus.
Have you heard from your colleagues and fellow leaders at UCSA that students at the other campuses, primarily maybe UCLA and Berkeley and San Diego, don't have the experience that you have, and too often have to work with, not have to, but don't have the opportunity to engage with the full-time faculty and instead the lecturers?
I think in some cases, yes. A lot of the learning experience comes from our graduate student instructors. And it really depends on what campus you're at and what classes you're taking. It varies from either if you're able to work with a tenured faculty member, or if you're working with the graduate student instructor more. It ultimately depends on the campus.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all your presentation in this panel. The last piece we'll have is public comment. We're going to have a microphone over here on the side, but before we do that, can maybe have a raise of hands as far as how many people you think will be talking. That helps gauge how much time we want to allow to that. What's that, about 7 or so? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to ask each individual to speak up here on the left. No more than 2 minutes per individual, and appreciate the brevity. And 2 minutes, of course, is the maximum. We'd appreciate you if you could go a bit less.
Oh my God, this is the first time the microphone's like shorter than me. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Ortega, and I'm the political director for the University of California largest employee union, ASME 3299. You've heard our testimony today from Claudia. So on behalf of our 22,000 members, we very much appreciate the legislature's questions of how UC is spending its money, the public's money. While today's hearing was rightly focused on the issue of executive compensation, as my colleague presented, and managerial bloat, there are other examples of ways that UC is squandering valuable resources that would be better spent holding down tuition for our students. So I'll give you one example, or another example. UC has literally dozens of outsourcing contracts across the state, paying outside firms to do the same work as career UC employees. And just 2 of them, UC could have saved $1 million, $1 million, just 2 that we were able to find. Had they brought the subcontracted workers in-house and paid them a fair wage, then we would have seen a different story. You can do something about it, and you have an opportunity now to reform the public contract code to raise UC subcontracting standards, and know that doing so will save UC millions of dollars that can be used to prevent more tuition hikes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Alexis Castro, and I'm the son of a single mother and farm worker, and a 2014 graduate of the University of California at Berkeley. As a student, I saw the impact of UC tuition hike firsthand, being that the year that I enrolled at UC Berkeley was when the first wave of tuition hikes came about. It nearly cost me my dream of a college education, and I am concerned that without real scrutiny and real reform of how UC spends its money, future generations will not be as lucky as I was. As students, it is appalling to know just how much of our tuition and fees is being regularly squandered by administrators, whether on Wall Street-style salaries and perks for executives or on outsourcing contracts that exploit low-wage workers, who more often than not look like me and my family, and cost substantially more than bringing those same workers on as UC employees. My mother didn't sacrifice for decades, and I didn't work throughout college and take out thousands in loans to see our hard-earned money used to subsidize lavish lifestyles for UC executives and windfall profits for UC contractors. We are counting on the legislature to properly fund UC, but not with a blank check. We need you to enact real reforms that correct the abuses and outright mismanagement that is putting the future of UC and California at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, for the follow-up speakers, I think if you stand up tall, we can still pick you up from the microphone. Didn't want to interrupt you. Sorry. That's okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Lester Howard. I'm a truck driver. I've been a truck driver at the University of California, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for the past 15 years. I'm also a resident of Richmond, where UC is currently planning to build a new global campus. That campus will either help out one of the most economically challenged communities in California or exploit it. We need you to help make sure UC does not squander this opportunity. Right now, UC is planning to outsource hundreds of service jobs we already perform for the entire facility to private contractors to take a huge cut off the top, pay rock-bottom wages with no benefits, and with no guarantee of local hiring. If this happens, not only will it hurt the people of Richmond, but it will cost far more than doing the right thing, cutting out the contractors and offering local people the chance to build a career at UC. UC's outsourcing practices are designed to do one thing and one thing only: weaken UC's unions. But the fact is that private contractors cost more than career UC employees. And if we're going to make sure that UC has the resources to prevent tuition hikes for our children, we need you to address these abusive practices in the legislature. The City of Richmond is counting on you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Maricruz Manzanares, and I'm a senior custodian at UC Berkeley for 15 years. As I've listened to today's hearing, it is clear that UC has gotten away from its core mission of building California's middle class. UC executives are doing great. The shrinking number of kids that can afford to pay rising tuition are doing great. UC's growing army of private contractors are doing great. But what about everyone else? The students, the low-wage workers, the taxpayers, and the families who dream of sending their kids one day to college. Without reforming the way UC does business, I fear that all the state budget process will produce us more money that UC administrators can use to continue business as usual. And in dealing with issues like executive pay and outsourcing, this legislature can help UC save money, prevent tuition hikes, and refocus on UC back on the most important work we can do today, rebuilding California's middle class. Please reinvest in UC, but do not do it without also demanding real change at UC. UC workers, students, patients, and the state we serve are counting on you to stand up for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Harley Litzman. I'm a student at UC Davis, and just want to do a quick poll. How many of you are here in support of what how the UC has approached the issue? See, not even the UC is here in support of how the UC has supported the issue. So when we look at what the face of the UC is, we kind of put up on the headlines and on the newspapers, Janet Napolitano, we put on the regents. That's not the face of the UC. The face of the UC are the people and the students and the workers in this room communicating this case, doing more. AFSCME 3299 shouldn't have to do research, digging into and decoding documents. They should be there representing workers, and they are, and they do an excellent job. But they have taken it upon themselves to do even more research and figure out exactly what the UC is doing. And that's what our students do. That's what my tuition, my fees, and the fees of all these other students go to develop this research to really see what the UC is doing. That shouldn't be a thing. We should be able to go to school, do our thing, and get out. But instead, we have to commit all of this effort, all of this research into figuring out what our own university is doing. And that's the face of the students and the workers here. So when you see that no one is here in support of what the UC is doing, I hope that resonates in like a kind of a democratic way in these halls. And seeing the questions that you had for the UC, I'm very excited to see where this is going, to see zero-based budgeting, to see a reconsideration of constitutional autonomy, and to see these things. And I would like to see where they're going. So thank you for having this.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kevin Sabo. I'm a student at UC Berkeley, and I'm the chair of the board for the UC Student Association. And I wanted to thank the two members of the committee that are here. I'm disappointed that 60% of the committee left, considering we have a full-time legislature that's the highest paid in the country. But I do thank the two legislators that are here. But I also want to point out that there is a tale of two UCs. I think there are the conversations of the people here in suits, whether it's here in Sacramento or over in Oakland, and even the students who have the privilege to be able to not be in class right now, like some of us are. Raise your hand if you missed class to come to this. Great. Hope your professors aren't watching. Or those of us who missed work, like I did, who are able to have the resources to come here. But there is a larger conversation and a larger narrative of what's going on in the UC. There are students we've talked to that are homeless in places like Santa Cruz, places like Berkeley, who are living in their vehicles, who are living in friends' living rooms, who are being taken advantage of in terms of unfair rent. There are students who are starving to the extent that student governments throughout the system have had to set up food pantries to take care of students. And so there is a larger conversation than simply these very surface-level conversations about numbers and the politics of what's going on. There is a real crisis going on in the UC. And so I invite the members of the legislature to leave the Capitol, to talk to students who are in their districts, to actively reach out to student communities that might not normally be reached out to or have the capacity to speak to you today, and really dig deeper and find out what's going on in the UC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Quinn. I'm the External Affairs Vice President of the ASUC, which is the student government at Cal that represents 36,000 students and is not at all affiliated with the UC. We're the most independent student government, so I can say whatever I want and they won't bother to cut our funds or anything, which is great. There's no way I can be as eloquent as Harley or Kevin, but I definitely wanted you all to consider being very scrutinous of the UC when you're rebuilding this budget, as well as thinking of other facts. Even if we manage to keep tuition low in the meantime, there are a lot of other costs that are rising at ridiculously high rates for students, especially for us in Berkeley. Rent is soaring. It's in the Bay Area, it's more expensive than New York now. And then residence halls in Berkeley, they're converting all of the double rooms into triple rooms, and so the UC is making so much more just per square foot in the dorms. Lounges are being converted into quadruple rooms. My little brother down at UC Riverside is living in a tiny triple. I don't know how 3 pretty big guys fit in that room, honestly. I'm lucky that I lived in a girls' room in a triple with all girls, that we knew a little bit better how to take up less space. So when we're thinking of just tuition as a part of it, that's definitely a huge part of it, and I think that we should really be considering how we can make the UC function without tuition, right? It was doing that for a long time before Reagan came in here and introduced the idea of tuition to punish protesters at Berkeley. Hey, we're still out here protesting, sorry about it. So I really think that, well, in the short term, we definitely need to focus on a tuition freeze. We also need to be looking at the larger context in the history of the UC and thinking about how we can make it actually more sustainable so all students and, you know, students of the workers that are taking such great care of us at AFSCME can all attend the UC one day. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mariam Naveed. I serve as a senator at UC Berkeley, so I work with Caitlin and Kevin very closely. Our Senate class represents the 36,000 students at Berkeley, and they all have the same concern. They can't afford to do this anymore. I have many friends that are working way too many hours, and it's impossible to even find time to study. And it's just sad that they don't have that privilege of having these resources to do well in their classes because they're too busy trying to pay. And so I just want to reaffirm everything that everyone has said. And in the process of what you all will go through in the next coming weeks, months, however long it takes, I just want to remind you all that we need to know where the money's going as well. There's always been a lack of transparency with money, and we demand that it not get lost in the process. The money deserves to go where students want it to go, and that involves tenuring professors, making sure that professors of color and women are tenured, especially in STEM fields. On top of that, making sure that campus climate is addressed, and making sure that all of the funding that you will be working on goes in the areas where students need it to go. So good luck.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you to the floor, and good afternoon. My name is Roman Rivelis, and I'm a senator of the Associated Students of University of California, Davis. Up until this point, we've had a lot of conversation about talking about students without actually having a conversation talking to students about their needs and about what exactly the experiences they go through. We pay as much in tuition as instructors bring in through research, and yet we have to fight for the transparency of our public institution. We deserve better. We're banking on the need for administrative control when we still have underfunded classrooms, faculty, and even students. And so we build food pantries in every UC and assume that we solved the hunger problem when we actually haven't. I worked very closely with our food pantry at UC Davis, and I've worked very, very hard to increase publicity and to make food security a conversation that every student can talk about, and I still can't, because I can't reach out to the 25% of undergraduates in the entire UC system that still feel as though they have to skip a meal because of the financial burdens. There's still problems. UC San Diego recently opened a food pantry and celebrated on its official page that no student should have to go hungry without asking the question of why students go hungry. We deserve better. We need to be thinking about very closely what are the root causes of these issues. Skyrocketing tuition costs, driving students through tens of thousands of dollars of debt. We need to be thinking about these very carefully and think about how we can best address these issues. And we need to be out there and having these conversations with students about their experiences, and how we can best address these issues starts here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, committee, chair, and members. My name is Rodney Orr. I'm a retired machinist from the College of Engineering at the University of California. Presently, I'm the legislative and political director for UPTE CWA 9119. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity for us to speak and to actually bring these issues out into the open. UPTE represents about 15,000 people, researchers, technicians, healthcare professionals at the University of California, part-time faculty at 3 community colleges, scientists, engineers, and skilled crafts at 2 of our national weapons laboratories managed by UC. And we strongly, strongly support the statements of ASME and UCSA. We definitely oppose the idea that we can solve the budget problems of the University of California on the backs of staff and students especially. And we most importantly want to encourage this committee and the state legislature to figure out ways that we can get back to a vision for public higher education in California that is much closer to the master plan of 1960. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sean Raycraft. I'm a shop steward at Safeway 1561 in Davis. I'm here on behalf of all the student workers who work in my store and in Davis in general. I'm here to ask you, please don't raise tuition on these student workers. Wages do not rise at 5% annually. I'm asking you, please, not to balance the budget or UC's budget on the backs of working students and students in general. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Shane Gussman on behalf of the California Teamsters Public Affairs Council. Our UC local represents just about 14,000 employees at UC. We'd like to thank you on behalf of them for holding this hearing and for taking a critical look at UC's budget. We hope at the end of the day that collectively we can come up with a way to fund UC and budget UC so that, as you heard from ASME and UPTE and other student representatives, so that we don't balance the budget on the backs of workers, on the backs of the students. Workers have their salaries and their wages have fallen dramatically below the cost of living, particularly the workers we represent. They're mostly low-wage workers. Many of them can't afford the basic necessities of life in the areas where they work, in the universities they work in. They can't afford to send their own kids to college. So we strongly urge you to find some solutions that don't result in further harming workers and students. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, remaining members of the committee. My name is Phil Koba. I am a senator at the University of California, Merced. And while I may not serve as a representative for 32,000 students, I serve for a little bit less than 6,000 students. And like many of those students, I am a first-generation immigrant family student. And I want to offer a unique perspective, just like President Kuchsang offered. UC Merced is a minority-serving institution. It was built in the Central Valley. And I've had numerous students come up to me with this so-called stability plan, really questioning not only how they would be able to stay in this university that their parents have already dedicated so much into, so much hours and actual just loans that they've had to pull out, but also how their future and how their brothers and sisters who actually look up to them for getting this far and being in some cases the first of their families to actually be able to be a part of a higher education system will be able to afford it in the years to come. So I thank you all for actually opening the conversation and questioning how stable the stability plan really is, and look forward to the conversations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Pavel Velkovsky. I am a freshman at UC Berkeley, and I'm an out-of-state student. So not only do we highly oppose the stability plan, which increases the tuition by 5% per year, but also the alternative, which is the Senate plan, which increases out-of-state tuition by 17% for next year, also sort of goes against the mission of the University of California. So the mission of the University of California is to enroll as many California residents as possible. And in a lot of states where out-of-state tuition has skyrocketed for students, whereas gigantic in comparison to in-state tuition. You see enrollment rates of out-of-state students skyrocketing. In the University of Iowa, for example, less than half of the students are in-state, and the out-of-state tuition is 3 times that of the in-state tuition. In University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, about 43% of the students are out-of-state, and there, about 43% of the students are out-of-state. So when tuition is increased for out-of-state students so much, it puts pressure on the state to enroll more out-of-state students, which goes against the mission to provide an education to in-state Californians. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Judy McKeever. I'm a respiratory care practitioner at UCSF Medical Center. I just came here to listen today, but then I decided I needed to speak. I've read on I think it was one of UC's websites lately, that there was a $500 million profit by the medical centers. Perhaps some of that money should be used to offset student tuition. The other thing I wanted to say is, in my department, we have been chronically understaffed for a very long time. UC, what they're doing now is, instead of hiring people, they interview people. They put the ad out there. People are interviewed, and then they're sent to a temp agency. What kind of company runs this way? I understand what they're doing. They're trying to union bust. They're trying to avoid paying benefits. So then these people maybe have to get state aid to get their medical care. They have no medical coverage. It's not a good idea to staff your hospitals with patient care workers with temp agencies. It's just not the best for the hospital, the university, especially for the patients. These are all new grads, so they come in with no experience. They are there sometimes for 4 and 5 years straight from a temp agency. I'd like to know, as far as the budget goes, how much money is budgeted for temp agencies now as opposed to 5 years ago? What is the cost in temp agencies? And what is the cost to the patient, more importantly? You've got inexperienced people coming and going. Then they can put UCSF on their resume, and they go work somewhere else. UC spends an exorbitant amount of time and money orienting these registry people that come through. As staff person, I am always orienting a registry person. It is frustrating, and then they get a job elsewhere and they leave. They want to work at UC. They applied at UC. They were interviewed by UC staff, but referred to a registry company. I say this is BS, and it needs to stop.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions? Okay. I think Office of the President has a list of some of the follow-up questions that we had, certainly the ones that we alluded to earlier, as far as the classifications, and then we have some of the pension issues as well. Maybe you could follow up with our staff, and also the analysts in the Department of Finance can work on that as well. So thank you all for participating today. Our next hearing will be early March, going over the UC budget as a whole, as far as the proposal from the governor from the January budget. And then we'll be announcing a follow-up hearing to this one, digging into further details of some items raised today. Thank you very much, and we'll adjourn this meeting.